The first shells began falling at precisely 0530 hours on December 16, 1944, across the snow-covered ridgeline of the Schnee Eifel, where the Green Troops of the 106th Infantry Division had been holding what intelligence officers called a quiet sector for barely 5 days. Staff Sergeant William Murphy of the 422nd Infantry Regiment's 2nd Battalion crouched in his frozen foxhole, listening to the methodical thunder of German artillery that rolled across the Ardennes forest like an approaching storm. At 23, Murphy had been in Europe for only 6 weeks, but his pre-war experience as a lumberjack in the Oregon forests had given him an intuitive understanding of sound and distance that now told him something catastrophic was unfolding in the darkness beyond the German lines. The 106th Infantry Division had arrived at the Schnee Eifel positions on December 11th, relieving battle-weary elements of the 2nd Infantry Division that had been holding the sector since September. The division's 3 regiments, the 422nd Infantry Regiment, 423rd Infantry Regiment, and 424th Infantry Regiment, were spread across a 28-kilometer front that wound through dense coniferous forests and rolling hills along the German border. The sector had been chosen specifically for the 106th Infantry Division because German activity was minimal, making it an ideal location for new troops to gain experience under relatively safe conditions. Murphy's Company F occupied positions along the forward slope of a ridge overlooking the Aar River Valley, where German outposts were visible through field glasses during daylight hours. The American foxholes had been carved from frozen ground using pickaxes and explosives, with each position reinforced using logs from the surrounding forest and camouflaged with snow-covered branches. The defensive line represented weeks of careful preparation by the 2nd Infantry Division, but the 106th Infantry Division soldiers had barely begun to familiarize themselves with the terrain when the German barrage commenced. The artillery preparation that began at 0530 hours differed fundamentally from the sporadic harassing fires that had characterized German activity in the Ardennes sector for the previous 3 months. The systematic nature of the bombardment suggested extensive planning and preparation, with German batteries delivering precisely timed fires against specific targets throughout the 106th Infantry Division's defensive zone. The volume and accuracy of the barrage indicated that enemy forces possessed detailed intelligence about American positions, while the coordination between different artillery units suggested a major offensive operation rather than limited local attacks. Lieutenant Colonel William Craig, commanding the 422nd Infantry Regiment's 2nd Battalion, recognized the tactical significance of the German barrage from his command post located in a reinforced bunker 200 meters behind the forward positions. Craig was a regular Army officer with 15 years of service, including extensive experience in pre-war training exercises that had taught him to distinguish between different types of artillery preparations. The systematic nature of the bombardment suggested that German forces were implementing fire plans designed to support a major breakthrough operation. The German artillery concentration included 105 mm and 150 mm howitzer fires supplemented by 88 mm anti-aircraft guns positioned for direct fire support against American strongpoints. The Wehrmacht forces had been secretly concentrating artillery units in the Eifel region for 3 weeks, moving batteries into position during hours of darkness while maintaining strict radio silence to avoid detection by Allied intelligence. The Ardennes offensive represented the largest German artillery concentration on the Western Front since the Normandy campaign, with over 1,600 guns assigned to support the initial breakthrough operations. Murphy pressed himself against the bottom of his foxhole as high-explosive shells detonated with tremendous force among the snow-laden pine trees surrounding his position. The German gunners were walking their fires methodically across the 422nd Infantry Regiment's defensive line, adjusting for range and deflection with each successive salvo. The precision of the bombardment suggested that enemy observers had been studying American positions for days, noting exact locations of foxholes, communication trenches, and supporting weapons positions. The 106th Infantry Division represented one of the last infantry divisions activated during World War II, with most of its soldiers having completed basic training just months before their deployment to Europe. The division's enlisted men were primarily 18 and 19-year-old draftees from Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio, while many of the officers had been commissioned through officer candidate school programs established to meet wartime expansion requirements. Their limited combat experience and unfamiliarity with the Schnee Eifel terrain would prove catastrophic when faced with veteran Wehrmacht forces implementing carefully planned breakthrough operations. Private First Class Robert Chen, a 19-year-old radio operator from Pittsburgh, attempted to maintain communication between forward positions and battalion headquarters while German shells systematically destroyed telephone lines connecting the defensive positions. Chen's SCR-300 radio represented the primary means of communication once wire lines were severed, but the mountainous terrain and atmospheric conditions created reception problems that made reliable communication difficult even under normal circumstances. The German artillery barrage added electromagnetic interference that further degraded radio effectiveness. The tactical situation facing the 106th Infantry Division reflected broader German strategic planning for the Ardennes offensive, codenamed Operation Wacht am Rhein by Wehrmacht planners. The offensive aimed to split Allied forces in Belgium and the Netherlands, recapture the port of Antwerp, and force a separate peace with Western powers that would enable Germany to concentrate forces against the Soviet Union. The Schnee Eifel sector had been selected as a primary breakthrough point because German intelligence assessed the 106th Infantry Division as the weakest Allied unit in the region. Generaloberst Sepp Dietrich's 6th Panzer Army represented the northern wing of the German offensive, while Generaloberst Otto von Manschiefel's 5th Panzer Army targeted the center of the Allied line where the 106th Infantry Division held positions. The 5th Panzer Army included experienced armored and infantry formations that had been refitted and reinforced specifically for the Ardennes operation. These units possessed extensive combat experience from campaigns in Russia, Italy, and France, giving them significant advantages over inexperienced American troops. The German forces opposing the 106th Infantry Division included the 18th Volksgrenadier Division and 62nd Volksgrenadier Division, supported by elements of the 116th Panzer Division and Führerbegleiter Brigade. The Volksgrenadier Divisions represented reconstituted Wehrmacht formations with experienced cadres supplemented by hastily trained recruits, while the Panzer units included veteran crews and modern equipment. The combination of experienced leadership, adequate equipment, and detailed operational planning gave German forces overwhelming advantages during the initial phase of the offensive. Murphy's sector came under direct infantry assault at 0615 hours, when Volksgrenadier troops emerged from the forest in coordinated attacks, supported by self-propelled assault guns. The German soldiers advanced through the snow-covered trees using infiltration tactics perfected during 3 years of combat on the Eastern Front, bypassing American strongpoints while concentrating against isolated positions. Their white winter camouflage and disciplined movement made them nearly invisible until they reached close range, where superior numbers and tactical experience proved decisive. The 62nd Volksgrenadier Division's assault against the 422nd Infantry Regiment's positions demonstrated textbook German tactics, with stormtrooper units penetrating the American defensive line at predetermined weak points while follow-up forces exploited the penetrations. The German attack had been planned using detailed intelligence about American dispositions gathered through reconnaissance patrols and observation during the previous week. Wehrmacht commanders possessed comprehensive knowledge of 106th Infantry Division positions, communications, and reserves. Lieutenant Colonel Craig attempted to coordinate defensive fires against the German assault, but communication problems and the speed of enemy advance made effective coordination nearly impossible. The 422nd Infantry Regiment supporting artillery consisted of the 589th Field Artillery Battalion equipped with 105 mm howitzers, but the German counter-battery fires had neutralized most of the American guns during the initial bombardment. The breakdown of fire support left individual rifle companies to fight isolated actions against overwhelming enemy forces. Company F's defensive position disintegrated rapidly under coordinated German assault, with Volksgrenadier troops overrunning Murphy's sector despite determined resistance by individual American soldiers. The inexperienced troops of the 106th Infantry Division fought bravely, but their limited training and unfamiliarity with combat tactics made them vulnerable to experienced German forces employing sophisticated infiltration techniques. The systematic nature of the enemy advance suggested careful planning and extensive rehearsal. Private Chun attempted to call for artillery support using his SCR-300 radio, but German jamming and atmospheric interference made communication with supporting fires nearly impossible. The 106th Infantry Division's communications plan had not anticipated the systematic disruption of radio networks that German electronic warfare specialists had prepared as part of the offensive. The breakdown of communication eliminated coordination between different units while preventing effective integration of supporting arms. The German breakthrough developed rapidly as Volksgrenadier divisions exploited gaps created by their initial assault, advancing through the Schnee Eifel positions with minimal resistance from disorganized American forces. The 18th Volksgrenadier Division penetrated the 423rd Infantry Regiment's sector north of Murphy's position, while the 62nd Volksgrenadier Division advanced through areas previously held by the 422nd Infantry Regiment. The systematic coordination between different German units demonstrated extensive planning and professional execution. Murphy and the survivors of Company F conducted a fighting withdrawal through the snow-covered forest, attempting to reach secondary defensive positions that had been prepared behind the initial line. The retreat became a running battle as German pursuit forces maintained contact with the withdrawing Americans, preventing consolidation of defensive positions. The superior mobility and winter equipment of Volksgrenadier troops gave them significant advantages during forest fighting in deep snow. The tactical situation deteriorated throughout the morning as German forces continued to penetrate the 106th Infantry Division's defensive line at multiple points. The 424th Infantry Regiment, positioned on the division's southern flank, reported heavy pressure from the 212th Volksgrenadier Division and advance elements of the 116th Panzer Division. The coordinated nature of German attacks across the entire front confirmed that the Ardennes offensive represented a major strategic operation rather than limited tactical movements. Brigadier General Alan Jones, commanding the 106th Infantry Division, attempted to coordinate defensive operations from his headquarters in St. Vith, but communication problems and the rapid development of German penetrations made effective command and control nearly impossible. Jones had been promoted to division command just 3 months earlier and lacked experience in large unit operations under combat conditions. The systematic breakdown of his division's defensive positions exceeded his tactical knowledge and training. The German success during the first day of the Ardennes offensive reflected careful operational planning that addressed every aspect of breakthrough operations against prepared positions. Wehrmacht intelligence had identified the 106th Infantry Division as an inexperienced formation holding an overextended front, while German forces had concentrated overwhelming combat power against specific penetration points. The systematic nature of the operation demonstrated the continued tactical competence of German forces despite their strategic disadvantages. Murphy's squad reached a secondary defensive position at 0800 hours, where they encountered other survivors from the 422nd Infantry Regiment attempting to establish a new defensive line. The improvised position lacked prepared fortifications and possessed limited fields of fire, making it unsuitable for sustained defense against German pursuit forces. The American soldiers had lost most of their heavy weapons and supporting equipment during the withdrawal, leaving them with only individual small arms and limited ammunition. The 589th Field Artillery Battalion attempted to provide fire support for the reorganizing infantry, but German counter-battery fires and advance elements of Volksgrenadier divisions threatened the artillery positions directly. American gunners found themselves fighting as infantry to protect their weapons, while the breakdown of communication made coordination with supported units nearly impossible. The systematic targeting of artillery positions demonstrated German understanding of American tactical doctrine and organization. Lieutenant Robert Foster, commanding the remnants of Company F, attempted to establish communication with battalion headquarters using available radio equipment, but German jamming and atmospheric interference continued to degrade message transmission. Foster was a second lieutenant who had been commissioned through Officer Candidate School just 4 months earlier, with no previous combat experience. The tactical situation exceeded his training and knowledge, forcing him to rely on instinct and the advice of experienced non-commissioned officers. The German advance continued throughout the morning as Volksgrenadier divisions maintained pressure against withdrawing American forces while armored spearheads exploited penetrations in the 106th Infantry Division's defensive line. The 116th Panzer Division's reconnaissance battalion had penetrated through the gap between the 422nd Infantry Regiment and 423rd Infantry Regiment, threatening to encircle both units before they could establish secondary defensive positions. The rapid development of German operations demonstrated superior mobility and tactical flexibility. Staff Sergeant Murphy recognized that the 422nd Infantry Regiment faced potential encirclement as German forces advanced around both flanks of the American position. His experience in forest operations enabled him to navigate through the snow-covered terrain, but the superior numbers and equipment of pursuing Volksgrenadier troops made escape increasingly difficult. Murphy understood that individual survival depended on reaching American lines before German forces completed their encirclement operations. The breakdown of the 106th Infantry Division's defensive positions created opportunities for German armored forces to advance toward strategic objectives in the Allied rear areas. The 5th Panzer Army's operational plan called for rapid advance through American defensive positions, followed by exploitation toward the Meuse River and eventual advance to Antwerp. The success of initial breakthrough operations enabled German commanders to commit reserve formations that had been held for exploitation phases. Private Chun attempted to destroy his radio equipment and classified materials as German forces approached the secondary defensive position, following standing orders for situations where capture appeared imminent. The 19-year-old radio operator had received extensive training in communication security procedures, but the practical application under combat conditions proved more difficult than anticipated. Chen's efforts to protect classified information demonstrated the individual competence that characterized American soldiers despite their unit's tactical failure. The encirclement of the 422nd Infantry Regiment and 423rd Infantry Regiment developed rapidly as German forces completed their penetration operations and began advancing toward objectives in the American rear areas. The two regiments found themselves isolated in the Schnee Eifel area with limited ammunition, no artillery support, and minimal communication with higher headquarters. The tactical situation represented a complete breakdown of the 106th Infantry Division's defensive operations within 12 hours of the German offensive's commencement. Lieutenant Foster made the decision to attempt breakout toward American lines rather than remain in static defensive positions that could not be sustained without resupply and reinforcement. The tactical situation facing Company F reflected the broader problems confronting both isolated regiments, as German forces systematically eliminated escape routes while maintaining pressure against American positions. Foster's decision demonstrated the individual initiative that characterized American leadership despite the unit's strategic disadvantage. Murphy and 12 other survivors from Company F began their escape attempt at 1,030 hours, moving through dense forest in an effort to reach American lines before German encirclement operations were completed. The group carried only individual weapons and limited ammunition, depending on stealth and forest craft to avoid contact with German patrols. Murphy's pre-war experience as a lumberjack proved invaluable for navigation through snow-covered terrain, but the superior numbers of German forces made successful escape unlikely. The German success during the first day of the Ardennes offensive validated Wehrmacht tactical doctrine, while demonstrating the continued combat effectiveness of German forces despite their strategic situation. The systematic coordination between artillery preparations, infantry assaults, and armored exploitation represented professional military competence that American forces had underestimated. The tactical lessons learned during the initial German breakthrough would influence Allied operations for the remainder of the war. The 424th Infantry Regiment, positioned on the 106th Infantry Division's southern flank, managed to conduct a more effective defense against German assault due to better terrain and more experienced leadership. However, the collapse of the 422nd Infantry Regiment and 423rd Infantry Regiment exposed the 424th Infantry Regiment's northern flank, forcing withdrawal to avoid encirclement. The systematic nature of German operations demonstrated operational planning that addressed the entire Allied defensive system rather than isolated tactical objectives. Brigadier General Jones requested immediate reinforcement from 8 Corps headquarters, but Allied reserve forces were limited and required time to reach the threatened sector. The 106th Infantry Division's rapid collapse had surprised Allied commanders who had not anticipated major German offensive operations in the Ardennes region. The intelligence failure reflected broader problems in Allied assessment of German capabilities and intentions during December 1944. Murphy's escape group encountered German patrols at 1,145 hours, forcing a firefight that eliminated half the Americans while enabling the survivors to continue their withdrawal toward Allied lines. The engagement demonstrated the superior training and equipment of Volksgrenadier troops, who employed coordinated small unit tactics against scattered American survivors. Murphy's forest experience enabled him to lead the remaining soldiers through terrain that would have been impassable for less experienced personnel. The tactical situation in the Schnee Eifel area continued to deteriorate throughout December 16 as German forces consolidated their breakthrough while advancing toward operational objectives in the Allied rear areas. The encirclement of 2 regiments from the 106th Infantry Division represented the most significant German tactical success since the Normandy breakout, demonstrating that Wehrmacht forces retained significant combat capability despite their strategic disadvantages. The systematic nature of German operations suggested extensive planning and preparation. Lieutenant Colonel Craig attempted to coordinate defensive operations with the isolated 423rd Infantry Regiment, but communication problems and German interference made effective coordination impossible. The 2 regiment commanders understood that their units faced annihilation unless immediate relief operations were mounted, but Allied reserve forces were insufficient to counter the scale of German breakthrough operations. Craig's professional competence and tactical knowledge could not overcome the fundamental disadvantages facing his isolated regiment. The German advance toward St. Vith represented a direct threat to the 106th Infantry Division's headquarters and supporting units, forcing Brigadier General Jones to consider immediate evacuation of the town. St. Vith served as a critical road junction that controlled access to key routes throughout the Ardennes region, making its capture a priority German objective. The systematic advance of Wehrmacht forces demonstrated operational planning that targeted specific geographic objectives essential for campaign success. Private Chun and 3 other survivors from his radio section managed to evade German pursuit forces by hiding in a cave system until darkness enabled continued movement toward American lines. The young radio operator had demonstrated exceptional individual competence despite his unit's tactical failure, preserving classified equipment and materials while assisting wounded personnel during the withdrawal. Chen's actions illustrated the personal courage and professional dedication that characterized American soldiers even during tactical defeats. Murphy's reduced escape group reached American outpost positions at 1,630 hours after 8 hours of movement through German-controlled territory. The 5 survivors represented less than 5% of Company F's original strength, illustrating the systematic destruction that German forces had inflicted on the 422nd Infantry Regiment during the first day of the Ardennes offensive. Murphy's survival demonstrated the importance of individual skills and experience in extreme tactical situations. The intelligence information provided by Murphy and other survivors from the 106th Infantry Division enabled Allied commanders to understand the scale and scope of German offensive operations for the first time. The systematic nature of Wehrmacht breakthrough operations suggested that the Ardennes offensive represented a major strategic gamble rather than limited tactical movements. This recognition influenced Allied response measures and resource allocation during subsequent phases of the battle. The encirclement of the 422nd Infantry Regiment and 423rd Infantry Regiment continued through December 17th and 18th as German forces consolidated their positions while preventing American breakout attempts. The 2 regiments attempted coordinated attacks against German encirclement forces, but limited ammunition and lack of supporting arms made effective offensive operations impossible. The tactical situation demonstrated the importance of adequate logistics and fire support for sustained combat operations. The surrender of both isolated regiments occurred on December 19, 1944, after 3 days of desperate fighting in encirclement. Approximately 8,000 American soldiers were captured, representing one of the largest tactical defeats suffered by Allied forces during World War II. The systematic German success validated Wehrmacht tactical doctrine while demonstrating continued combat effectiveness despite strategic disadvantages. Staff Sergeant Murphy spent the remainder of the Battle of the Bulge serving with hastily organized replacement units attempting to contain German breakthrough operations. His combat experience and forest skills made him valuable for reconnaissance and patrol operations, while his first-hand knowledge of German tactics contributed to improved defensive preparations. Murphy's survival and subsequent service illustrated the individual resilience that characterized American forces despite tactical setbacks. The tactical lessons learned during the 106th Infantry Division's destruction influenced American training and organizational development for the remainder of World War II. The importance of experienced leadership, adequate communication systems, and realistic training became apparent through analysis of the tactical failure. The systematic nature of German success demonstrated that inexperienced formations could not be expected to perform effectively against veteran opponents regardless of equipment advantages. The strategic implications of the Ardennes offensive extended beyond immediate tactical considerations to influence Allied planning for subsequent operations in Europe. The demonstrated German capability for major offensive operations forced reassessment of Wehrmacht's strength and intentions, while the tactical lessons learned contributed to improved defensive doctrine. The systematic German success at Schnee Eifel provided valuable insights into enemy capabilities and limitations. Private Chun survived his captivity and was liberated during the final weeks of the war, returning to provide detailed intelligence about German tactical procedures and organizational methods. His technical knowledge of communication systems and first-hand observation of Wehrmacht operations contributed to post-war analysis of German military effectiveness. Chen's survival and subsequent service demonstrated the continued value of individual competence even during tactical defeats. The human cost of the 106th Infantry Division's destruction represented approximately 9,000 casualties during the first 3 days of the Ardennes offensive, including captured, killed, and wounded personnel. The systematic nature of German success illustrated the importance of experience, training, and adequate preparation for combat operations. The tactical failure provided valuable lessons about the requirements for effective defensive operations against experienced opponents. The broader context of the Battle of the Bulge demonstrated that the 106th Infantry Division's destruction represented only one phase of a larger German offensive that ultimately failed to achieve strategic objectives. The Wehrmacht's initial tactical successes could not be sustained due to logistical limitations and Allied recovery capabilities. The systematic German planning that produced breakthrough operations proved insufficient for achieving long-term strategic goals. Murphy's recognition that the 106th Infantry Division was finished during the opening artillery barrage proved accurate, as the systematic German assault eliminated 2 regiments and severely damaged the 3rd within 72 hours. His intuitive understanding of the tactical situation demonstrated the importance of individual experience and professional competence in military operations. The artillery preparation at 0530 hours on December 16, 1944, marked the beginning of the 106th Infantry Division's destruction and represented one of the most successful German tactical operations during the final phase of World War II. The legacy of the 106th Infantry Division's experience during the Ardennes offensive influenced American military doctrine and training programs for decades after the war's conclusion. The systematic analysis of tactical failures provided valuable insights into the requirements for successful defensive operations, while the demonstrated importance of experience and training became fundamental principles of military education. The tactical lessons learned at Schnee Eifel contributed to improved understanding of modern warfare and the continued importance of professional military competence.